So I think about 99% of the population of every country where Netflix is available has now seen Baby Reindeer. But if you haven't, it's about a struggling young British comedian named Donnie who is stalked by an older woman named Martha Scott. And the show says very explicitly that it is a true story. Not that it's based on a true story or inspired by a true story, but that in fact it is a true story. The writer and the star of the show, Richard Gadd, has said that it's based on events that actually happened in his life. In the show, the Martha character makes a reference to, quote-unquote, hanging my curtains, which the main character interprets as vaguely sexual. After the show became a massive hit, someone discovered that a Scottish woman, Fiona Harvey, had tweeted at Richard Gadd, the show's creator, in 2014, that my curtains need hung badly, which kind of sounds like the weird grammar used in the Martha character's messages to Donnie. Apparently, Harvey sent Gadd something like 16 other tweets, or at least that's what the publicly available information reveals. According to Harvey, lots of people then started messaging her, accusing her of being the real Martha Scott. Harvey then did an interview with Piers Morgan, claiming that although she did know Gadd and tweeted at him a bunch of times, she didn't stalk him or attack him or his girlfriend, or do the other crazy things that the Martha character is depicted as having done in the show. Harvey sued Netflix on June 6, 2024, claiming that the Baby Reindeer show was defamatory toward her. In this video, I'm going to talk about whether I think that this lawsuit has any merit, that is, whether it has any chance of success, and of course, what the implications of it are from an indie filmmaker's perspective. But first, a couple of disclaimers. First, what I'm going to be telling you today is not legal advice, because if I were going to be giving you legal advice, I would need to understand your individual circumstances and your individual needs. And right now, I'm just a random lawyer talking to you on the internet. And second, I'm going to be talking about matters of U.S. law. So if you are doing your indie film production outside the United States, then different legal concepts than the ones I talk about in this video might apply to you. And of course, if you found this video educational or at least entertaining, please like this video and subscribe to this channel so I can keep bringing this kind of educational content to young, hungry, independent filmmakers like yourself. So what are Fiona Harvey's chances of success with this lawsuit? The lawsuit was just filed as of the time I'm making this video, so the court hasn't made any rulings yet, but I'm going to speculate a bit about what might happen based on the complaint and the public information that I've seen. At the outset, one interesting fact is that Fiona Harvey filed her complaint, that is the document that describes her claims against Netflix, in California, and she claims that Netflix violated various provisions of California law, like the California right of publicity statute that I've talked about elsewhere on this channel. But Baby Reindeer was produced in the UK, and although it's not 100% clear how well Harvey actually knew Gadd or what sort of relationship they had, any interactions that they had also occurred in the UK. In deciding which states or which country's law applies, courts usually focus on where the events that are relevant to the lawsuit happened. So I think a decent argument could be made that UK law applies and not California law. If UK defamation law applied, that would probably be bad for Netflix because defamation law in the UK is more pro-plaintiff than US law. There are several notable differences between US and UK defamation law, but one key difference is that under UK law, it's presumed that the allegedly defamatory statement is false. What does that mean? Defamation means a false statement that damages the plaintiff's reputation. For example, Harvey alleges that the show depicts her as having stalked Richard Gadd, which she claims is false. Under UK law, at a trial, the jury would be instructed to assume that the statement that Harvey stalked Gadd was false, unless Netflix proved otherwise. Netflix would therefore have the burden of proving that the statement was true, that is, to come up with evidence that Harvey did in fact stalk Gadd. Under US law, generally speaking, the opposite is true. The plaintiff has to prove that the allegedly defamatory statement is false, rather than the defendant having to prove that it's true. So, under US law, Harvey has to prove that she didn't stalk Gadd, and that the show's other inflammatory statements about her are false. So it's interesting that Harvey decided to sue Netflix in California rather than in the UK, considering that UK law would probably be more favorable to Harvey. The second thing that I would observe about this case is that it illustrates an important concept in defamation law that's called of and concerning. To be defamatory, a false statement has to be what's called of and concerning the plaintiff, meaning that a reasonable person would interpret the statement as being about the plaintiff. For example, if the Martha character in Baby Reindeer had instead been named Fiona Harvey, it would have been clear that this of and concerning requirement was met, because it would have been obvious to a reasonable person that the show was meant to depict Fiona Harvey. But that doesn't happen in Baby Reindeer. Fiona Harvey's name is never mentioned anywhere in the show. So the court is going to have to determine, would a reasonable person believe in watching Baby Reindeer that the Martha character was meant to be a depiction of Fiona Harvey? Now, somebody might object to the way that I framed this question by saying, well, Fiona Harvey came out and identified herself as the person the Martha character was based on, and she went on Piers Morgan, and this media circus happened. So of course a reasonable person watching the show would think that Martha was in fact Fiona Harvey. But statements made by Harvey herself don't count for the purposes of this of and concerning analysis. If they did count, the mere fact that a defamation plaintiff filed a lawsuit or made some other type of big public statement could cause every allegedly defamatory statement to meet this of and concerning requirement, even if the statement made no reference to the plaintiff at all. Anyway, the complaint points to a couple of similarities between Martha Scott and Fiona Harvey. It says that the Martha character looks like Harvey, and that Harvey, like Martha, is a lawyer. Also, Harvey is about 20 years older than Gadd, and the Martha character is depicted as significantly older than Gadd, too. Also, Harvey's complaint admits that she was accused of stalking a lawyer in a newspaper article. The complaint mentions this as kind of an afterthought, possibly because going into detail about what the article says might not paint Harvey in the most flattering light. But anyway, I don't think the mere fact that Fiona Harvey looks kind of like Martha, or the fact that Harvey and Martha are both Scottish lawyers, would be enough by itself to have a reasonable person believe that Martha is supposed to be Fiona Harvey. It's not like they look completely identical, and for better or worse, a lot of people are lawyers. However, the fact that Baby Reindeer refers to Martha allegedly stalking another attorney might be enough to get Harvey past summary judgment. That is, it might allow Harvey to avoid having her case dismissed because there isn't enough evidence to support her claim that Baby Reindeer is quote-unquote of and concerning her. This is particularly true because apparently the story about Harvey allegedly stalking another attorney was a big media story in Scotland when it occurred. The lawyer who Harvey allegedly stalked, Laura Ray, said as much in her own interview with Piers Morgan, where she claimed that Baby Reindeer's account of what Harvey did to her was basically accurate. Also, of course, there's the tweet I mentioned earlier, where Fiona Harvey tweeted Richard Gadd that she needed her curtains hung badly, which is the same kind of expression that Martha uses in the show. Because Twitter, or I guess X, I'm still not used to calling it X, is publicly available, and of course it's possible for a show on Netflix to get massive distribution. You could argue that Netflix should have reasonably anticipated the possibility that people might find the tweet in question and conclude that Harvey was Martha's real-life counterpart. So I think that Netflix might have trouble getting out of this case early by arguing that the statements made about Martha in Baby Reindeer aren't of and concerning Fiona Harvey, despite the fact that the show doesn't mention Harvey by name. The third thing that I think this case illustrates is another important concept under U.S. defamation law, which is the idea of substantial truth. Under U.S. law, generally speaking, if an allegedly defamatory statement isn't 100% accurate, but it's substantially true, you can't make a defamation claim based on it. For example, the lawsuit says that Harvey is not a quote-unquote convicted stalker, which Gadd's character claims that Martha is in the show. However, apparently a court in Scotland did issue a temporary restraining order against Harvey based on her alleged harassment of Laura Ray, the Scottish attorney I mentioned earlier. A temporary restraining order isn't the same thing as a criminal conviction. Instead, it's an order issued by a judge without a trial, usually without hearing from the person who it's being issued against, that says that the person who is the subject of the order is not to interact with another person, and saying that if they do, they're going to be subject to criminal penalties. But the average person who's not a lawyer doesn't necessarily understand that getting a restraining order issued against you isn't the same thing as being convicted of a crime. And generally, U.S. courts are reluctant to hold a layperson, that is a non-lawyer, liable for defamation based on just a technically inaccurate statement of the law. There was a defamation case involving the singer George Michael that illustrates this point. George Michael publicly stated that he had been entrapped by a police officer named Marcelo Rodriguez into performing quote-unquote lewd acts in a men's room in a park in Beverly Hills. Rodriguez sued Michael, claiming, among other things, that this statement was defamatory because what Rodriguez did, whatever that was, didn't meet the legal definition of entrapment. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said that George Michael's statement was not defamatory because Michael, as a non-lawyer, couldn't reasonably be expected to make 100% technically accurate statements of the law. In this Baby Reindeer case, I can also imagine a judge deciding that Donnie's statement in the show, that Martha is a quote-unquote convicted stalker, is not defamatory toward Harvey, because Harvey did in fact have a restraining order entered against her, and a reasonable non-lawyer could be forgiven for thinking that this was basically the same thing as a criminal conviction, even though it's not. Another possible example of where this concept of substantial truth might come into play would be when it comes to Donnie's statement in Baby Reindeer about the number of messages that Martha sent to Donnie. Donnie says that Martha sent him, I think, 4,000 emails or something like that. If Harvey says that's not true, I didn't send Richard Gadd 40,000 emails, but it turns out that Harvey did send Gadd a significant and disturbing number of emails and messages on other platforms, even if it was less than 40,000, the judge might find Donnie's allegation to be substantially true, even if it's not 100% technically accurate, and therefore not defamatory. On the other hand, there are some aspects of the show that the complaint focuses on that are pretty black and white. For instance, in Baby Reindeer, Martha smashes a glass bottle on Donnie's head, but Fiona Harvey denies doing that to Richard Gadd. If Harvey didn't assault Gadd at all, it would be hard to argue that the depiction of Martha attacking Donnie is somehow substantially true. So at the very least, this substantial truth issue won't completely dispose of all the defamatory statements that are relied on in Harvey's complaint. So overall, if we assume that Harvey's most inflammatory allegations are correct, that is, that she never assaulted Gadd, that she didn't wait outside his home for days on end, and so forth, I think she has a reasonable shot at recovering some damages from Netflix. The jury might find Fiona Harvey to be an unsympathetic character, as she did, at the very least, have a restraining order entered against her for allegedly stalking Laura Ray, and as she says in her own complaint, there was a newspaper article about it. And it seems clear from the public record that Harvey did send Gadd a number of messages, although it's not entirely clear what their relationship was. However, Harvey's attorneys may still be able to convince the jury that Netflix shouldn't have depicted Harvey as physically attacking Gadd, and that this was harmful to her reputation. Now, what lessons does this case provide for independent filmmakers? First, I would say that if you're doing a film that's based on a true story, and you don't want members of the audience to recognize who certain characters in the story are, it's important to look through the publicly available information about the real people on whom the story is based, such as their social media accounts. In this Baby Reindeer case, possibly this whole debacle involving Harvey going public could have been avoided if the team that produced the show had reviewed Harvey's social media posts to make sure they didn't contain content that was too similar to the statements by the Martha character in the show. That similarity turned out to be too specific for people to ignore. If Gadd had used a different euphemism in the script, other than hanging my curtains, that might have saved Netflix from having to deal with this situation. On the other hand, if the character in your story just shares some general characteristics with their real-life counterpart, like the fact that the fictional character and the real person are both lawyers, for example, you probably don't need to worry about it. Second, and on a related note, even if you don't use the exact name or likeness of a real person in your project, it's still possible for you to be liable for defamation if your story contains a character who's based on that person. If a reasonable member of your audience would be able to figure out who the character is based on, the real person your character is based on may be able to sue for defamation if the story makes damaging and false allegations about the character. Third, if a film that you bill as a true story or based on a true story says something that's technically inaccurate about a real person, but the substance or the gist of what you say is true, U.S. law probably will not find what you said to be defamatory. So, like we discussed, even if Harvey is correct that she wasn't convicted of a crime for stalking, it appears that she did have a court order entered against her based on her alleged harassment of Laura Ray. If this court order is what Gadd meant to refer to when he said, "I am being stalked by a convicted stalker" in the script for the first episode, Netflix can make the argument that because Gadd is not a lawyer, he can't be held to a standard of being 100% legally accurate. Of course, I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to be legally accurate in the statements you make in your projects. I'm just saying that even if you aren't, U.S. defamation law is not likely to punish you for a technical inaccuracy. So I hope that was helpful to you in understanding the defamation lawsuit concerning the so-called real-life Martha Scott from Baby Reindeer and the possible implications of it for independent film. And thank you for watching.